Jake Retzlaff, it's officially done at BYU. What does it mean for Jake? What does it mean for the Cougars? And what does it mean for the Big 12? We talk to the expert. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. And that's Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, talking all things BYU. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day. Jake Retzlaff, no longer a member of the BYU football program. That's the biggest story in the Big 12 this week. One of your top contenders loses its quarterback. We'll get into honor code, where Retzlaff goes next, where BYU goes next, and all of that. We will also talk later on in the show, segment 3 to be exact, the new look Pac-12, Texas State going out west. What does it do to the Big 12 and all of college football? If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. Jake, I was about to get on the show with you to record this podcast. I had set down meal in lap. That meal fell on the floor pretty quickly. Uh-oh. And when it fell on the floor, I realized there were poop streaks in my carpet, my cowhide rug that I have. And I tracked the poop streaks to my Roomba vacuum, where I realized that my Aussie Doodle had taken a dump on the floor, and the vacuum decided to march said feces through my home. So it is, at the time of recording, all over the floor along with my dinner. Am I in a worse spot than BYU without its starting quarterback? Like, on the scale, it's a very large spectrum. Is BYU in a better spot than me right now?
I will say BYU's in a slightly better spot than you, my friend, because that's rough. That's a new one. That's about as bad as it can get, it feels like.
It's a new one. I did catch the dog eating the food that was on the floor as I was trying to clean up what poop I could before we started recording. So being here, as I was cleaning it up, I thought, this is probably what BYU feels like a little bit right now. They're cleaning up the feces. They're trying to, and I've mentioned it a bunch on my show, they're trying to salvage a brand that's been tarnished by a story so large, a story so upsetting to a lot of people. Right now, if I'm an athlete, and I've heard this point made a lot, if I'm a 4 or 5 star athlete, and one of my favorite things to do is have, sexual encounters with someone, BYU's off my list. But at the same time, BYU's like, okay, we don't care. This is what we do. It's what we've always done. And they had success holding to the honor code. Jake Retzlaff signed up for that honor code, broke it. And I don't know if I have too much of solace for a guy that, wasn't being suspended a whole year, could take his lumps, say, I'm going to be a bigger man. I signed up for this. I didn't follow through. Instead, he's leaving.
Well, and that's the thing about this, Drake, is you're going to obviously hear blowback from other fan bases saying BYU's too uppity about their honor code system and their own standards. But you're right. This has literally been around for decades. Jake Retzlaff, and the way I know Kalani Sitake spells out the honor code when the guys come on recruiting visits, it's explained in explicit detail what the expectations are at BYU. And if you don't abide by those rules, BYU's got no problem saying thank you, but you need to move along here. And that's what it appears, that both parties feel like they need to separate and go their separate ways. I wish Jake the best as he moves forward with his playing career, but at the same time, you mentioned BYU, they're sticking to their guns. They've done that before, and they'll continue to do so for the foreseeable future.
No doubt. What can we, I mean, you mentioned you'll always root for him, or at least always hope that things end up well for him. What is next? I mean, what are you hearing in an update as far as where his career goes from this spot?
I've said it multiple times on my podcast already this week. Notre Dame looks like it's the odds-on favorite to land him. Now, there's other programs out there that are obviously quarterback needy, and Jake, you can think of what you want of him, but he is a guy that's in demand because you don't find high-level Power 4 quarterbacks on the market this late in the year. And for all intents and purposes, I'm expecting to hear him announce he's going to Notre Dame unless something changes very quickly. But I think the thing is, Jake is a very capable quarterback, and a program like a Notre Dame that has only underclassmen quarterbacks would do well to bring him in essentially as a one-year bridge to their next QB system.
Is it safe to say Jake Retzlaff will play week 1 of the next college football season as far as this whole entire civil case is concerned?
That's what I am expecting because the civil case has officially been dismissed. Both sets of lawyers filed a motion to have it dismissed. Judge signed off on it. So it has been dismissed with prejudice. It cannot be relitigated. It cannot be resurrected. It's done and dead. And I think with that in the rearview mirror, Jake can move forward here. And the biggest question I had, Drake, was, okay, transfer portal rules still apply to a guy like him, even though he's a graduate transfer. But I reached out to some people in the national media, and essentially the overarching answer I got back from every single one I asked was, Jake, you and I both know that the transfer portal rules are impossible to essentially enforce if you're the NCAA. So they fully expect that Jake will file a waiver or whatever he has to do. And I would expect, Drake, if he is the better quarterback on whichever roster he ends up on, he will likely be available to start game one.
Yeah. Did you expect this to play out as it has? I mean, if I'd asked you 5 days ago, what are the options and where can we end up? Where is this on your list?
It was one of the higher options because here's the deal. I always expected when this lawsuit got filed, it felt like the most plausible, I want to say explanation or his defense, I guess I'll say, was going to be that they had a consensual sexual relationship. And that's what ultimately came out to be. But that's a violation of BYU's honor code. And history suggests if you watch BYU over the years, if you break that honor code, you are subject to penalty. And you already mentioned earlier, Drake, a lot of other athletes, Brandon Davies, Reno Mahe, Gennaro Guilford, Jamal Williams, they've all had to miss at least one semester, if not an entire year, before they're resuming their playing careers when they have broken the honor code. BYU actually showed some leniency with just a 7-game suspension is what they were imposing on Jake, but he thought it was untenable. And with his situation regarding they only had 1 year of eligibility remaining, he felt like it was in his best interest to find a new program to play for.
Yeah, let's leave it here and then get into BYU's quarterback situation, where they go now. I made the case on my show that this is a slap in the face to an offensive lineman, a linebacker, a cornerback who is celibate despite temptation, as everyone goes through. Celibate despite temptation because they signed onto an honor code. They know the higher calling on BYU, whether they are of the LDS faith or not. They follow these rules to represent those 3 letters and represent its fan base. This, to me, shows some cowardice in 2 years after the encounter. Jake Retzlaff says, I did break the honor code, and now he leaves.
Well, yeah, I do think there's an element to that because you would like to think a guy that if he runs afoul of a system or a set of rules that he signed up for willingly, because that's what you pointed out, Dre, is you sign the honor code. It's nobody's forcing you to go to BYU. And he signed those rules and said, hey, I'm going to abide by them. And if the reports are to be believed, he was breaking those rules from the very early days of his time at BYU. And yet 2 years later, he decides he's going to jump ship. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a cowardice narrative in there, but I think the best thing for both sides is to have him and BYU go their separate ways and hopefully find success in both areas.
Well, let's hope that our sponsor can help me figure out how to take dog poop out of both hardwood floors and carpet today. That coming up next, let's talk BYU's next starting quarterback, Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. I'm saving up money to buy a professional cleaning service so I can clean up all of the poop that is all over my floor now after the vacuum is thrown it across the house. And the way that I can help save money effectively is with Monarch Money. I'm 24. I don't get the money thing. I look at my app and I'm like, oh, where did it all go? But with my own personal CFO, I have full visibility and control over my finances. In addition to managing money, I'm also building wealth. Takeout, or I have all of the Hulus and the Netflixes and everything, my subscriptions, they add up a ton and add up more than I expected. This is really good accountability from me. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for half off your first year. Change your finances. Take control of them with monarchmoney.com today. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars talking all things BYU. It does seem like the Cougs have 3 viable options at quarterback, viable enough that we're unsure which of the 3 will be named the starter when it comes week 1 in Provo. If you're a betting man, if you had to say, hey, this is the guy, who is BYU starting quarterback?
If you were asking me if they're starting a game tomorrow, I would put my money on McKay Hillstead. But to your point, Drake, all three of the candidates here, Bear Bachmeyer, Trayson Bourget, and I already mentioned Hillstead. I think any one of them come game one in just over a month's time, it feels like. 'Cause we're already in July. It's a crazy thing we're playing a game next month. But that's how quickly it's going to be here. But I think if you were to ask me if they're starting a game tomorrow, it's McKay Hillstead. But I can't discount the other two come training camp over the month-long camp they'll hold in August.
Yeah, Jake Retzlaff last year, QBR-wise, was 11th in the Big 12. Yeah. You are losing a below-average quarterback. The 50th QBR guy in the country, somewhere around that. You're losing a below-average Power 4 Big 12 quarterback based on those numbers. Failed to throw for 230-plus yards in 9 of 11 wins, I believe is the official stat. This is not a gunslinger. He is not the end-all, be-all to quarterbacks in the conference. You didn't lose Sam Levitt. You didn't lose Sawyer Robertson. Just analytically, and I know we want to laud what he did because he helped BYU win 11 games, but analytically, you're not in the worst spot with it. You just needed an average or above-average quarterback to replace him, and BYU's kind of in the same spot from a signal caller standpoint. Am I wrong there?
No, see, my argument, Drake, is that BYU among the programs in the Big 12, that if most programs would lose their starting quarterback in this manner, Drake, a lot of them would be like dead and buried. It just feels that way. But you point out that the metrics say that Jake, was a middling quarterback at best last year, and I believe that. BYU was the sum total of its parts. I'm talking about had a very good defense, had an above-average offense, it had elite special teams, and all three phases contributed to getting BYU to 11-2. You mentioned a Sam Levy, you mentioned a Sawyer Robertson, even an Avery Johnson from Kansas State. You take any one of those guys off of that roster, and I would say that those programs are in infinitely worse shape than the BYU football program is, because I think BYU's depth and the guys that they return from last year's squad will make up the difference. And if they can get average quarterback play, they should be in a relatively similar spot, it feels like, come this fall.
Yeah, Jake, if you are Kalani Sitake, and this is tough. I know you will both be at Big 12 Media Days, and the first question, it is a travesty to all journalism, but the first question he gets is not about the quarterback room, and I foresee his response being, here is our statement as a university. This is the final time I'll address it. I'd like to talk about the rest of my team for the remainder of media days. I see that being the way he approaches it. Otherwise, 10 of his 15 questions will be related to Jake Retzlaff or the next quarterback at BYU. If you're him, how do you handle this in a locker room full of guys who expected to have a senior-led quarterback room next year?
I think you go to the guys and say, hey, what's happened has happened. Jake is going elsewhere. We have to move forward on our own. And that's the thing, is that it's tough to see a guy like Jake walk away from a program that I'm sure guys like Chase Roberts, for example, were expecting to come back and have a really big senior year alongside a senior quarterback in Jake Retzlaff. The message from Kalani Sitake and his staff has to be, guys, what's happened is in the past. We have to look forward. We have to rally around one another, and we got to go do our thing. And we cannot let what happened affect us going forward, because hindsight is only going to hurt BYU. You have to have the mindset of, okay, burn the boats, to use that expression, and move forward here. And I think BYU will be better served just to focus on what they have right now. And I think that Kalani Sitake, to your point, he will probably address that question early on in media days and try and get away from it. I still expect some people to try and come up with so-called creative methods to get another answer out of him, though.
Have the Cougars lost a win or two in all of this, or do you feel like the expectation should remain the same?
I think that Jake Retzlaff's probably worth 1 to 2 wins. Yes. So I've made this argument. I'll make it here as well, is that if BYU, in my mind, I thought the ceiling maybe was like a 10-2 season this year. And I thought I would put them in the mix for the Big 12 title game and maybe a college football playoff berth, because I just think the Big 12 is going to be a dog-eat-dog conference just based on how things looked last year. So if BYU, their ceiling with Jake Retzlaff was 10-2, maybe it drops the ceiling to 8-4, 9-3 at the very best if everything goes right. But if the Big 12 is as cutthroat as it appears it could be, Drake, you can still find yourself in the mix. We all know how crazy it got towards the end of the season last year with regards to who was going to go to that Big 12 title game. So I think the biggest thing for BYU is focus on what you control, the controllable narrative there. And if they do that, they could have, I think, a very successful season, all things considered.
Let's take out the circumstance, which is a hard thing to do, but this is a football podcast or a college athletics podcast. Let's take out the circumstance. A contender is without its starting quarterback. Should the rest of the conference be celebrating this?
Yeah, I got no problem saying that. I cover BYU for a living, and I'm saying that. The thing is, BYU, when you lose a starting quarterback, there's just no denying that it's going to have an impact on your football program. And yes, like I said, if maybe 10-2 was their ceiling with Jake, it drops them to 8-4. Well, that probably puts them in that second tier of conference teams in the Big 12. So yeah, the other contenders, the Arizona States, the Texas Techs, the Kansas States, etc., they should be lauding the fact that BYU doesn't have their QB.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge piece in all of this. Losing a senior quarterback and losing a couple of wins is obviously on the table. And I think, the huge piece is locker room material for an opposing team. They now see you as this injured animal in the forest because you're without one of the most important positions in all of football. But what if? Yeah, what you got?
Can I make a counterpoint to that? Because you and I both know BYU thrived last year on the disrespect card. Remember, they went to UCF as an undefeated team and were an underdog to a sub-500 UCF night squad. And I can tell you, that squad was irate, the fact that they were a road dog to a sub-500 team. Now that they're going to be that proverbial wounded animal, I agree that they're going to be other teams licking their chops thinking, all right, we got the Cougars right where we want them. I think BYU on the other side is going to be thinking, hey, we know what you think you got, but we're going to spring a trap on you guys, and we're going to use that disrespect card to fire ourselves up.
And thanks to FanDuel.com, I was able to buy a house because BYU was an underdog against UCF in that game, which was just insanity. And the Cougars pulled it off for all of us that went to FanDuel and were involved in that action. What are the odds? I'll end it here, and I would like to get into some Pac-12 talk because you're out in the West Coast. KSL cover a ton of that stuff. Give me... what if McKay Hillstead or Bachmeier or what if one of these guys are worth 2 or 3 wins? Is there an opportunity to say, oh, shoot, we didn't understand there was kind of that diamond in the rough waiting?
Yeah, that absolutely is an argument there, but they obviously are going to have to prove it on the field. The good news is 2 of the quarterbacks in this mix already have Division I starting experience in Hillstead and Bourget. Now they're at the G6 level. They haven't participated in a game at the Power 4 level, so that obviously is a step up in competition. But the fact that they have starting experience gives them the added advantage of knowing what to expect when they take the field. I think the biggest thing for BYU is that they got to find one of these quarterbacks, and like I said, you maybe expect average quarterback play out of them. Everybody else around them, the running backs, offensive line, wide receivers on offense, and then Jay Hill's defense, it's got to take another step forward here. It was top 30, top 40 last year. If they're top 20 this year, that's going to keep BYU in some really, really close ball games. And if they can grind out extra wins, that would be a big, big boost to the ego of BYU football.
Yeah, I think it's a very important season for BYU to win. You have such a massive recruiting class coming in that you're 1-6-6 away from having guys jump ship. I know Baylor saw it a couple of years ago after finishing up a Sugar Bowl season with a bowl loss to Air Force. They lost some really good recruits, top-end recruits, because those guys wanted to compete for college football playoff. You don't want to be in that position if you're BYU in 2025. Coming up, new look Pac-12. Does that mean that we're back to a Power 5? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. Jake, you've been covering sports out west for a long time, and now a team that's kind of in the west. Texas State is joining the Pac-12. That conference has enough universities to play real deal football in their league and be a complete league by 2026. Yeah. To me, this is step one of Oregon State and Washington State, not just rebuilding the Pac-12, but rebuilding their brands and trying to put themselves in a position where in 2030, 2031, if the ACC needs to backfill, it's those 2 schools that they look to. And maybe that's the biggest piece of this entire Pac-12 advancement to me is I foresee in 4 or 5 years the Pac-12 once again going through a big set of issues when Washington State and Oregon State have built themselves up enough to hopefully on their parts find their way into a league like the Big 12 or the ACC.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a whole move just to get themselves, you mentioned, into a spot where if and when conference realignment at the Power 4 level comes back around, those 2 are viable candidates. I will add one more to the mix because they think they're going to make this move to the Pac-12 with the thought of leaping up, and that's Boise State. I think that they think over the next 3, 4, 5 years, they can establish themselves as a viable candidate to jump to the Power 4 as well. So, yeah, I do expect that, the Pac-12, it's going to be around for, this little interim period, but there's going to be a whole lot of upheaval, it feels like, at the end of the decade going into the early part of the 2030s. And Wazoo and Oregon State, they're positioning themselves to make that leap once again.
Is this Well, let's play this game. Texas State has made a bowl game the last couple of seasons, but they had not done that prior to G.J. Kinney becoming the head coach there, taking them 15 some odd years since moving into the FBS level. Is this a smart move? One, for the Pac-12, two, for Texas State.
I think it's a good move in that they're going to make more money. Now,
sure,
there's an argument you made. They stuck around in the Sun Belt. Maybe the next round of media rights deals, they would have made similar amounts of money. But if the $10 million that some people are pitching that the Pac-12, the new look Pac-12 can generate, it's a no-brainer for those schools to take that money while they can get it. But I'm with you that long-term, now, there's a decent chance that come the next round of realignment, the Mountain West and the Pac-12 are reforming to merge into the Pac Mountain Conference, because simply put, there's not enough programs out here in the Western United States. And Texas State, they've joined a Western league, so they've got to keep their eyes peeled at all times for any movement on this front, because they very well could find themselves starting to look for a new home and potentially having to ask the Sun Belt to come back home one day.
Are we close whatsoever to a Power 5 again, or is that idea that many Pac-12 pundits want you to know, is that complete poppycock?
I'm going to make a lot of my Utah State brethren angry when I say this. It's nowhere near that. Here's the deal. We just talked about the fact that we think that this is going to maybe last for 4, 5, 6 years, and then it's probably going to get broken up again. Let's say the Pac-12 were to stick together long term, give it a decade, maybe 2 decades down the road. Could they establish themselves maybe as a Power 5 once again? Yes, but I just don't think with what I expect the lifespan of what this current iteration of this conference to look like is going to be. Yeah, it's not a Power 5. It's the Power 4 and the G6.
Are we going to feel, and I can make the case for yes, I don't know if it's an insane stretch, are we going to feel the effect of this in the Big 12 in 4 or 5 years?
Meaning what? I'm trying to follow your logic.
So Texas State going to the Pac-12 and that conference being reformed, will we feel the effects of that? And even in the kind of the case that I would make would be, maybe you look at Washington State and Oregon State and say, wow, they built their own conference. They become much more valuable in the eyes of Brett Yormark or anybody. Will we feel the effects in that way, in the realignment way, in 4 or 5 years?
I think we could. It all kind of depends on what the SEC and the Big Ten's long-term vision is. Tony Petitti's out here speaking to the Big Ten commissioner, crowing about the fact that they're going to stick to their guns and they want the 4 automatic bids in the college football playoff. That tells me they plan on being one of the boss hogs of college football going forward. And there are strong rumors out there about the Big Ten wanting to go to potentially 24 teams. Well, I know that there's some schools in the Big 12 that'd be happy to jump into the Big Ten to rejoin some of their Pac-12 brethren. Utah, but that's another story for another day. But I think the biggest thing is the Big 12 could feel those effects. The nice part is Brett Yormark, he is shown to be a pretty shrewd negotiator, and he's done a very good job so far about kind of seeing the future when it comes to college athletics and trying to stay at least on top, if not ahead of it. And I hope he continues to do so, because the Big 12, they need a visionary like him.
On that note, a bit here, you don't foresee Utah getting bold enough to go try to rebuild a conference, do you?
Rebuild a conference, no. Begging and pleading and crying to get into the Big Ten, yes.
Sure. And on that, right, what are the odds in your eyes we see a shakeup in the Big 12 in 4 or 5 years when we start to rework these TV deals? Or is there any chance that we start to either there are two sides to this. A, you lose schools who leave for the Big 10 or the SEC. B, you say, hey, Cincinnati, this is just not viable for us from a financial standpoint. We feel like we're more valuable and can give schools more money if we don't have you in our league.
I think it's more of a likelihood that the SEC or the Big Ten picks off a school or two from the Big 12. I get where your logic is, speaking of maybe like a Cincinnati saying, hey, thanks, but it's time you guys move on down the road. I just think that the biggest thing for the Big 12 is they're going to monitor, see what the ACC does. I'm sure they'd be happy to scoop up some of those Florida schools, the Louisvilles out there, maybe even grab Pitt when it comes to conference expansion. But I do think that the Big 12 down the line, there are likely going to be teams in this conference that are going to be targeted by the Big 10, I think in particular, to join that league if they really do want to expand plus 20 plus schools and make themselves into a miniature NFL.
Can we safely say, though, that Clemson and Florida State could exit the ACC, go to the Big Ten or the SEC, and not need a pairing from the Big 12 to go with them? Should we feel like we're not in total danger if the ACC starts to fall apart?
No, the ACC can fall apart and the Big 12 would be unscathed. I'm pretty confident saying that because, yes, they could pull a Florida State. They could pull a North Carolina away, a Clemson away, and that's not going to affect the Big 12. The problem is if the Big 10 has those eyes out towards the West Coast or maybe the Intermountain West up where I'm at with BYU, Utah, Arizona State, and Colorado, they want a kind of a bridge to the West Coast. That's when the concern is that they start eyeing other schools actually in the Big 12.
Yeah. If you're Brett Yormark and this move has been made, Texas State to the Pac-12, do you pay any attention to it?
No, sorry. I love San Marcos. I've been there a couple of times, but yeah, they just don't move the needle enough. And I know that they tried in terms of evaluating all options. I still, for the life of me, don't know why UNLV wasn't like given more overtures or more love from the Pac-12. But I also think that UNLV looked at it and said, hey, we have a chance to be one of the big dogs in the newly reformed Mountain West. Why would we want to go play second, third, or fourth fiddle to Boise State, Washington State, and Oregon State in the Pac-12? So I think that they're in a pretty good spot. So yeah, I think if you were the Pac-12, all you really could do is look at schools in Texas, and TSU ended up being the option.
Yeah, certainly Dan Mullen, that shows an investment that UNLV wants to put into football. Their schedule is going to be much easier than the Pac-12 schedule. And if they're 11-1 or 12-0, no matter who they play, it's really tough to leave that team out.
They have watched Boise State for decades, Drake, make runs to the BCS, make runs to the college football playoff, feasting on the Mountain West. UNLV is like, hey, they moved along. We're the big dog now.
It's their term. Jake Hatch, what can folks expect from Locked On Cougars? They've already gotten plenty of it this week when it comes to, I'm going to say content, but really the whole Jake Retzlaff and quarterback situation.
Yeah, the biggest thing is kind of the next steps for Jake Retzlaff, where he goes next. We'll be covering that. And also, we'll be looking at all the options at quarterback for BYU, passing along any intel that we are able to get in terms of what the quarterbacks look like. You and I will be at Big 12 Media Days. I'm looking forward to actually asking Kalani Sitake and the players that are there, hey, what's your evaluation of these other three quarterbacks? Give us the feeling around the program about these guys, because that's a big part of this conversation that we still need to break down over the next month and change until training camp starts.
Certainly, that is Jake Hatch. You can find him on all platforms and through Locked On Cougars YouTube, as well as that Spotify and Apple and wherever you get it. This has been, and always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. A crossover with Cougars and Doe A.G.